So much, Prue. Thank you, everybody. It's like I've invited you all to a big party, and now I'm going to play guitar to you and play you my new song for the next 20 minutes. So indulge me, if you will. But, I mean, when we kind of set up this conference, we did pull together a little panel, and we did sort of like say, what do you think about sort of like this work? And people said, well, that's quite interesting. We should have that. And so I'm going to take their confidence and say, share with you what we've been learning here. And also try and get your feedback about a piece of work which is a work in progress. And there are two works in progress which we're going to share with you today. And this is the first piece of work, and it's called Teenage Work-Related Indicators of Adult Economic Outcomes. And that's what it's about. And it's a piece of work which has been kindly sponsored by the Commercial Education Trust. And I know we have at least one trustee from the trust here, and we're very thankful for this support. This work comes out of an understanding that we kept stumbling across within the longitudinal literature various indicators relating to a young person's work-related experiences and attitudes linked to what happens to them later on. So I'm going to run through some of these as I goes on. But we became aware of them, that something seems to be happening. And we thought, well, this is very interesting, that something about your experiences or your attitudes related to work as a teenager actually makes a difference. You do better or you do worse. And so what we wanted to do was to say, well, can we be methodical about reviewing these and seeing what we can find? Can we actually do a big search through the literature and try and find as many of these kind of working longitudinal indicators, teenage indicators of adult economic outcome success or lack of success, and do something about it. And if we can we pull these together? Can we make sense of them? Can we turn them into something which might be a useful tool? Because the longitudinal literature ought to tell us truths which are helpful to us. You know, that's our best knowledge which is available to us in terms of the data which we have. And so that's what we wanted to do, and we thought, well, if we can do this, can we then sort of like share that tool with schools, and what uses may they make of it? And so this is the project. That's what we want to share with you, and we want to know what you think about where we are, because we're midway through it. So that's kind of the background. Here we go. We kicked off with a literature review. So we kind of used UK literature because we were kind of very interested about a tool which might work in this country. And we kind of thought, well, we need to put some boundaries around this. And you never quite know what happens in one jurisdiction as opposed to another jurisdiction. So we looked in kind of the UK. We ended up generating lots of English, so like data. We're looking for work-related experiences and attitudes, which can be measured and influenced by school staff. So we're kind of thinking, oh, there's lots of indicators. Many indicators as you like, you know. How well you draw a picture of a human figure at age 5 is an indicator of how well you do later on in life. How many books are in your family home as a child? You know, how many PhDs you've got. But what we're interested in here is measured and influenced by school staff. That's what we're trying to do here. Very ambitious, but we thought we'd give it a go. This is the databases we used. These basically have thousands upon thousands of pieces of literature which we can test. These are the key words which we use. Yeah, teenage, longitudinal, careers, work experience, mentoring. These are the sorts of things we'd expect to get: expectation, aspiration, certainty. These are some of the words which we knew from our prior reading, which are likely to come up and help us. Earnings, employment, needs, they're the outcome areas. And what we found was that there wasn't a lot of literature. Actually, we knew quite a lot of it already. We found 2 or 3 new things. But then on top of this sort of like literature, what we wanted to do is, well, let's do some work of our own. And Elnaz Kashef is our analyst, and what she was able to then do is do some work of our own to try and fill some new gaps and create some new information about what's happening here. So what I want to do is run through with you what we've found in terms of these indicators, and then share with you what they are, and then think about, well, what might this mean for what a tool might look like. Okay? So I'm going to run through these. Indicator number 1. Some people might know the work of Scott Yates from De Montfort University. He and his colleagues looked at teenage uncertainty. Teenagers aged 16 asked, what do you want to do? Most people your age have got a job aspiration. What's yours? Do you have one? If they say, I don't know, in the longitudinal studies, and so these are, got lots of data about them before and after, and I'm kind of assuming you all know what longitudinal data studies are. enough people are nodding for me to just press on. What we find is that, their risk of being neat is much, much higher than somebody who, from the same social background, same sort of qualifications at 16. So uncertainty seems to be a penalty for people. We look as well at a second study here by Sabatas, a colleague who's worked with Yates. Again, he's looked at impact on earnings. Age 34, this is remarkable, isn't it? 20 years later. And it's not saying there's a big variation in earnings, but a proportion of the variation in earnings can be accounted for if you go back to that teenage uncertainty. If you use your statistical modelling to control for all these other factors which would normally predict who earns what, how well people do in life. So teenage uncertainty, aspiration and ambition. Aspiration and ambition. Isn't it annoying when you have spelling mistake in the slide? Isn't it? So this is work by Ingrid Hsu from the Institute of Education, great scholar, who looked at 2 data sets, and she looked at the nature of the aspirations of young people. And here she was looking at people who had high aspirations. So age 16, where do your aspirations lie? Are they kind of professional, managerial or not? And the studies allow you to identify these people. And again, so they're controlling for all things about social background. She kind of created, or she and Pollock created, a tool to be able to judge that age 33 or 34. And they kind of had it mixed up. They had a method for measuring occupational status. Is it sort of white collar or blue collar, is it high or low status? And but a lot of that was earnings. That's the bit we're really interested in. And the earnings, again, we find these sorts of relationships. That if you have your ambitions are higher as a teenager, even if you do better than somebody who is similarly qualified and similar backgrounds. Aspiration and ambition. Again, here we have work again which Ingrid was involved in, which looked at 2 studies, and this is important because this is a relatively recent one. Some of these studies are a little bit old, and we don't apologise for that because partly all we got. We're kind of reliant upon what data is out there. But the longitudinal study of young people in England is relatively recent. The people are now aged about 23, 24. And so the data we've got from them when they were 16 is about 8 years ago. So it's still a bit old, but still. And what we find here is that young people at risk of NEET, so they've got lots of the sorts of things you'd expect people to do. Very poor attainment, poor attendance, poor behaviour in school. You kind of get a sense about who's going to be at risk of being NEET. But if you simply ask them, do you plan to stay on in education or not? Well, it's an indicator that they are more likely to do that. They're less likely to become NEET. So I'm running through these relatively quickly, and I will carry on doing so. Misalignment. Here's another one for you. It's not an exhaustive. This will not carry on forever. Don't worry, people. But in terms of misalignment, this is the idea that if your career aspiration is misaligned with your educational expectation, you end up doing worse. This is again work by Yates. So age 16, where's your ambition? What's your career ambition? What's the most education you expect to get? Are you going to stay on for A-levels? Are you going to get a degree? Are you going to leave at 16? And what he finds here is that if you underestimate the amount of education which you need for the career aspiration you have in mind, you're much more likely to become NEET, and we have some sense of the impact there. And we sometimes might think, well, what does that mean? What's really going on? And when we think about that data which we have, and it may be quite complicated, but it's an indicator. It's another indicator which people have drawn. And then if we look at this further study again by Sabatas, again finding implications at age 34. Go through his longitudinal data. This British cohort study, one of our favourite ones because it's got lots of really rich data, rich questions. Earnings, small, but detectable at age 34. So as we work through, we're finding these various indicators. Here's one which is quite close to home. This is careers information. This is the piece which we published a couple of months ago. Ellie was kind of the lead author of. Career talks to people from outside of school. What we're able to demonstrate is that if you kind of control for all the other factors which are relevant here, that teenagers, 14, 16, who receive career talks as outside speakers up to 1.6% per career talk, at age 26. an indicator that something seems to be happening. You know, kids who are doing this seem to be bucking the trend in terms of what we might expect of them if we compare them to similarly people from similar social backgrounds, similar levels of attainment. Here's a piece as well, which I published a couple of years ago, where it's kind of longitudinal in a different way. It is longitudinal because we compare between two different places in time, but this is our 19 to 24-year-olds thinking back to what they did while they were at school. And sort of in the peer review literature, so it kind of comes up in our searches, and what we find is that the relationship between the there's one check there. There's the relationship between the volume of engagement in the core activities. For engagement activities is linked to earnings later on, in this case between the ages of 19 to 24. So what we're finding is that there's a whole series of indicators, and you'll notice as you think through this, there's some overlaps in here. Some of them are similar studies, some of them are in similar areas, and here we have a piece which Chris Percy and myself were involved in, where similar, same sample as the earnings, but here less likely to be neat in terms of employment outcome. Here we're looking at school attitude, which is interesting. So into a new area, thinking about, if you ask kids, is school a waste of time? Well, turns out, if they agree with you, they're right. They earn less than somebody who is similar sort of social background to them, or similar background. And here, sort of Duckwood and Shune looked at beating the odds, and they kind of think, oh, this is interesting. We've got all these kids who we think are going to sort of do really badly. Is this anything which bucks the trend? And if you disagree with this and say, well, I don't agree school is largely a waste of time, if you have a more positive sense about your engagement in schooling, that's one example, there's a series of questions and you give them marks for all the questions and make assumptions, then you're at a risk. And again, so like BCS and the more recent longitudinal study of young people, we find risk of being neat, so by coming out of it. So when we went through the literature, we're looking for these indicators, that's what we found. And we thought, well, let's see if we can find some more. Let's have a go. Because Ellie particularly has spent a lot of time looking at some of these databases, and we thought, well, we have the capacity to do this, so let's do it. Let's see what we can find out. And so we kind of use these sorts of control variables: gender, academic ability, home learning environment, parental social class, educational expectations, socioeconomic factors. And these are very standard sort of indicators which people use when trying to sort of decide who does particularly well, who does particularly badly. This is interesting. Put this in square brackets. I put it in square brackets because you remember the thing which I was saying to you about can schools actually do something about it? Can they influence it? And influencing the sort of family contacts of young people is not something they can easily do. And I kind of put it in square brackets because as we've been doing this work, we've sat down and we've talked in depth for a kind of 2-hour sort of structured interviews with a number of schools, and they said they're actually very interested in this one, because they think, well, this is an indicator which is useful to me in thinking about whether a young person is well placed or poorly placed. And what Ellie's been able to find is that teenagers at age 16 who agree with the proposition they have, when they leave school, they have family or friends who are going to be able to get them a job, well, 10 years later, they actually earn more. And, it's statistically significant, and there's a relationship with all those controls in place. So, we move on. Career information. This is interesting. Teenagers who are 14 to 15 agree that they talk to their teachers. Did you talk to your teachers either inside of lessons about their future studies or outside of your studies? We find there that they are less likely to be neat. There is something, it's an indicator of something. And we don't know necessarily what the something is, but this is a kind of a clue, a sign, a signal that something seems to be happening. Again, sort of like, we kind of looked at the thing about, we tested schools are a waste of time for earnings. And we found that if you agree that schools are a waste of time, you earn 16% less at age 26 than somebody who's pretty much similar to you. And then we looked at, and again, square brackets, and I don't know, I was just talking about this in the other session I was involved in. Here, part-time sort of like employment. Are teenagers working part-time alongside their full-time sort of like education? And we've just finished a review, including a number of UK 5 UK studies. And what we find is that there's overwhelmingly that if as a teenager you do part-time work, it's associated with better outcomes later on. And there's lots of longitudinal studies which look at this. They actually often say that your attainment might reduce a bit, particularly if you do more than 5-10 hours a week. And so this is like little whistle-stop tour gives us kind of like a set of indicators which we've grouped together. And this is our first one. We're calling it thinking about the future. And this is a work of progress. And we've kind of phrased this in this way in thinking about identification of young people who are at some risk. And it's not a risk of necessarily sort of becoming neat. What our indicators are related to is young people at all levels of the labour market, all levels of attainment. Are they? Is it suboptimal where they end up? Is this an indicator that they could be earning a bit more, or could be a bit less likely to be unemployed than somebody similar to them? And so but you'll see there is an overlap with a lot of literature which is thinking very narrowly about people who have needs. And so we have thinking about your future, uncertainty, the nature of occupational ambitions, expectations of staying on. And we might think, well, this is, people all expect to stay on these days. So perhaps we might, do we need to think about updating these things? But this is what we're engaging in. Career spaces which are misaligned. In thinking about your future, we thought, well, is this where family networks would sit, in that you'll only know about this if you've thought about it, you have a view about it. So thinking about your future is like it seems to be that it's a thread through some of these indicators which we've shown that young people who think about their futures at 15 and 16 seem to do better than those who don't think so much about their futures. Talking about their futures. Teenagers who discuss their future plans with their teachers. Teenagers who've had helpful or unhelpful career talks. So there's something there about the process of engaging with people, either talking to them or being talked at by them. That that it's not just about thinking about it, it's about talking about it. And then if we think about experiencing the future, our school-mediated employer engagement activities, our part-time work. And then thinking about, sort of like today, their attitudes towards schooling. And in all of this, we've got clusters of indicators. And we've, over the last few weeks, sat down with people in schools, a number of schools, and worked through with them and asked them to think, is this helpful to you? And the people we sit down with tend to be the career professionals, people who lead on careers, who have, and it's quite remarkable. It is quite remarkable how things vary between schools. It varies enormously. You can't say that you're better than you are, but it varies enormously in terms of whether everybody gets a one-to-one careers interview, or what age things dip in, and about whether they felt that these sorts of indicators were helpful to them. Because it seems to us is that there's literature here which tells us things which we're pretty sure are true in terms of there's a relationship, there's correlations often. We don't want to know things are causal by any means, but it tells us something. Is this something which people would find persuasive? Does it ring true? And if it does ring true, how do they think they might make use of it? And that's my question really for you as an audience. I don't really know who you all are. I recognise some of you, but I don't know who all of you are. And so that's our question. And because we start a bit later, maybe we might do about 7 minutes of questions and discussion, or none at all if you haven't got any.